and a educational forum on health and environmental justice. It's nice to see everybody. I hope everyone has had a nice summer. We haven't seen you all in a couple of months. Juan, if you want to go ahead and start the presentation. So tonight's meeting is going to be on health equity and environmental justice. We are going to run this meeting similar to the way we did the Planning 101 meeting, because it's a joint educational forum and GPAC meeting. So we'll get into that in just a second, but let's go to the next slide. And we have simultaneous interpretation. Maria, are you there? Oh, Lily, you launched the room too quickly. If you could bring them back in.
Let's see. Sorry about that.
Apologies for the...
Tenemos interpretación simultánea para esta reunión en español. Por favor, haga clic en el icono del mundo que usted está viendo señalado en la barra de herramientas para seleccionar español, si eso es lo que desea.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Let's see. Now, Lily, do you want to launch the interpretation rooms? And everyone will see a little globe at the bottom, and you can you should select either English or Spanish for which room you're going to be in. So if everyone could go to the globe, select the language, and then we will continue on. Okay, next slide, please. As we mentioned before, this is a joint meeting of the General Plan Advisory Committee and the Community Educational Forum. These are the GPAC members. I'm going to have, everyone please mute your phones here. I'm going to have city staff make sure that everybody is here at the meeting and identify who is here and who isn't. Next slide, please. So our meeting this evening, I'm going to start with just a couple of project updates, and then we're going to give a presentation on health equity and environmental justice. We're going to provide some background information and then existing conditions in Ventura, and then end with some best practices from other jurisdictions. After that, we're going to have the majority of our time for question and answer and discussion. We have a few questions for you that we want you to think about, including what do you think are the health equity and environmental justice concerns in Ventura? And what's your vision for a healthy and equitable city? And that's really what we're trying to do with this element of the general plan. Before we go on, I'd actually like to introduce two new members of the Raymond Associates team. We have Lily. Go ahead and wave, Lily. She's going to be helping in the background running Zoom and a planner working on the project. And then we have Juan, who is going to be giving the presentation this evening, and he is one of our experts on health and environmental justice. Next slide. So I'm going to start just quickly with a few project updates. It's been 2 months since we met as a general plan advisory committee, and we have been doing quite a bit of community engagement work in the background since we last met. In the interim time, we have had meetings with all of the 7 community councils in the city, and we got great information, really specific, detailed information about issues and opportunities in each of the areas. We also have had a series of pop-up workshops, and some of you may have seen us around town and seen city staff around town. And we're getting really good information, and we're engaging with community members who we haven't necessarily engaged with, who may not be part of the public process. And that's the point of the pop-up workshops. If you have ideas, if there's events where you think it would be good in the next month or so for us to come out, if you could shoot us an email and let us know what those events are, then we can do our best to come out. Again, we want really broad, we want events with a lot of community members coming out to them. And again, it's a great way for community members to just participate quickly in the process. And then finally, you all may have noticed that we have a vision survey that has been launched. The survey is running through October 3rd. And so far we have about 350 people who have taken the survey. We really need more people and want more people to take the survey. So I would ask all GPAC members and all members of the community who are here to forward the link. It's on the project website, to forward the link to all of your friends and all of your colleagues and neighbors. Post it on Nextdoor, post it on Facebook. Let's get the word out. The last survey we did had over 2,000 respondents, and we'd love to do better than that this time. So we have a few more weeks left, and so let's try and make a big push together as a group to get more people to take the survey. The survey is actually really critical because it helps set the stage for the alternatives development process to understand where new development can go and what areas should be preserved. So we really want to hear community's input on this before we jump into the next phase of work. Okay, Juan, if you can go ahead to the next slide. We're going to start our evening here and our interactive portion with a poll question. And the question is, what are the key equity and environmental justice issues in the city? So what we'd like everyone to do is to go to menti.com and use this code 7594728 and write what you think the issues are. You can write as many as you want. I think we have a space for 10. Write as many issues as you want. We're going to ask you to do this for the first few minutes while we give an overview of what the general plan is. And then we're going to come back together and we're going to show you what the results are. So we want to make sure that everyone is logged on to that and moving forward with it. And then we can put that, Lily, if you can put that information, the menti.com and the use code, if you can put that in the chat room, that would be great. So everybody has that available. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So, because everyone is here, I would assume most, if not everyone understands what a general plan is and what this project is at this point. But let me go through that really quickly. So we are preparing a general plan update, a comprehensive general plan update for the city. As part of the effort, we're also preparing a local coastal program, which is the area within 1,000 feet of the coastline, and then a climate action and resilience plan. And part of our effort with this will include an environmental impact report to look at the environmental impacts of everything that is laid out in the general plan, the local coastal program, and the climate action and resilience plan. There's a couple of other projects that are also happening in the city right now, including an active transportation plan, and then a historic context statement and historic survey. As I've mentioned before, the active transportation plan is a very important item associated with the general plan effort because it deals with the active transportation system, pedestrian, bike, transit, and how people get around the city. And it's also really critical for public health and equity, which is our topic this evening. Next slide. And as a reminder, the general plan is a long-range policy document for the city. It looks 25 to 30 years into the future. It identifies community strengths and topics of concern. It enables all of us to come together to create a shared vision for the future. And there are 8 required elements as part of the general plan, or elements or chapters. And one of those is the one we're talking about this evening, which is environmental justice. And Juan will give you an overview of that in just a moment. Okay, next slide. We have a 6-step process as part of the general plan. We are right now in the visioning phase, sort of between visioning and alternatives. And we are going to be moving in the next month or two into the alternatives phase, where we're going to start to create land use and transportation alternatives. And then parallel to that, we're going to be looking at policies that are going to be kind of big picture formative policies for the city. We'll then create the, once we have all of that resolved, we'll then move into the development of the plan and then review and adoption. And as we've mentioned before, community engagement is critical, so there'll be engagement throughout the entire process. Next. Okay, so this is the word cloud from Menti, from what you all have identified as what are the health, equity, and environmental justice issues. The larger the word, the more times it was mentioned. So cost, housing, trees, traffic, pollution. It keeps moving, so I can't actually read all of these things, apologies. But affordable housing, not enough green space, segregation, environmental issues, bad air quality. So a lot of topics here that this is great. You all are adding all of this, but a lot of topics here that we are going to be talking about this evening. Healthy homes, making it the city bike friendly and pedestrian friendly, addressing climate change. I see transparency in government. So these are all great ideas. Thank you very much for adding those in. You can keep doing that throughout the meeting, and we will come back and take all of this information down at the end of the meeting. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Juan now, who is going to take over the presentation.
All right, thank you, Matt. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for being here this evening. As Matt mentioned, my name is Juan Reynoso. I'm an urban planner and public health professional with Raymond Associates, and I'll be presenting on today's important topic of health, equity, and environmental justice. So before moving forward, I'd like to first establish some shared definitions. Equity is about fairness and ensuring that people have access to the same opportunities and have what they need to thrive and succeed. Equity is not the same as equality. Equality looks at providing people with the same level of resources regardless of any other factors, such as race, gender, income, education, etc. So to use a recent public policy example, equality is providing everyone in California with a $500 stimulus check, regardless of their income or wealth. Now, in contrast, equity would be to create some sort of sliding scale system so that for these stimulus checks, so that lower income households would receive more than $500 and higher income households would receive less than $500. But still, all Californians would receive something and all households would benefit through the policy. It's about lifting all boats. Equity is important because communities of color and lower income populations often have less access to resources like quality healthcare and safe housing. This lack of access impacts their quality of life and makes it harder for them to thrive. Equity is also both our process and the outcome we seek to achieve. For the purposes of the general plan update team is using equity, not equality. A related but often confused term is racism. There are three types of racism we'll be referring to in today's presentation: interpersonal racism, institutional racism, and structural racism. Interpersonal racism is the bias that occurs when individuals interact with others and their personal racial beliefs affect their public interactions. So this is the most common understanding of racism in our country. A more modern understanding of racism argues that this interpersonal racism is actually a symptom of a more fundamental system of racism. So taking a step back, institutional racism refers to the unfair policies and discriminatory practices of specific institutions, so think like schools or workplaces and governments, that routinely produce racially inequitable outcomes for people of color and provide advantages for white people. Individuals within institutions take on the power of the institution when they reinforce racial inequities. Finally, structural racism is the history and current reality of institutional racism across all institutions, combining to create a system that negatively impacts communities of color. Structural racism normalizes and reinforces these existing dynamics that routinely advantage white people while producing chronic adverse outcomes for people of color. So this probably sounded a little bit confusing, but one way of understanding the differences between these three types of racism is to think of a city, think of Ventura. Individual racism is like this virtual room where we're all sitting, or some community room where we're all sitting. It's our immediate context. Institutional racism is like the building that room is in, the policies and the practices that dictate how we live our lives. And finally, structural racism is the entire skyline of buildings in Ventura, all of which interact to dictate our outcomes. So there has been a long history of both institutional and structural racism in planning and development, which has caused our cities and regions to be separated based on race and income. The most well-known example of this type of structural racism in planning is known as redlining. Between 1930 and 1968, the US federal government worked with private banks and other lending institutions in playing an active role in denying mortgage loans based on the neighborhood's racial demographics. The federal government developed these color-coded maps, grading areas for investment based on racial occupancy. Black households were barred from either purchasing homes or relocating to certain neighborhoods. This structural racism came to be known as redlining because certain neighborhoods were colored red on mortgage lending maps, such as the example here. Redlining occurred in cities throughout the country and left a lasting scar of community disinvestment, as well as large racial disparities and generational wealth that persist to this day. Other examples of institutional and structural racism in planning include the siting of waste facilities. So dating back to when the planning field first started in the 1800s, there has been a discriminatory siting of polluting facilities and industries such as coal, oil, natural gas, and chemical facilities in mostly Black, Indigenous, and immigrant neighborhoods. Other more recent forms of polluting infrastructures, including airports, seaports, highways, warehouses, and truck routes, are also disproportionately placed in Black, Indigenous, and immigrant neighborhoods. Moreover, even though the Fair Housing Act of 1968 banned the practice of redlining, there have been more subtle forms of racism in planning that continue to this day, such as urban renewal, redevelopment, and highway construction and expansion, which then displaces low-income communities and communities of color. Although it's even more subtle, single-family zoning is also a form of racism in planning. By artificially setting minimum lot sizes and increasing the value of land, single-family zoning prevents low-income residents or residents without generational wealth from purchasing those homes. And as I mentioned earlier, because of redlining and other forms of structural racism that have been going on for centuries, Black, Indigenous, and people of color have less generational wealth to be able to afford those single-family homes. Now, this history of racism in planning is important because it's become embedded into our health and embedded into our DNA. In city after city, public health researchers have found that your zip code is a greater determinant of your life expectancy than your genetic code. And so addressing racism in planning and reversing those policies of the past will go a long way to improving health outcomes for all residents. Here's another visual way to think about this connection between racism, place, and health. Different aspects of our living conditions, whether it's the type of land uses in your neighborhood or whether there's easy access to quality jobs and services, they influence our health behaviors, such as whether you have access to good nutrition, or you're able to easily go outside and get some physical activity, which then affect your health outcomes and whether you get certain diseases and injuries. So now let's take a step back again and reflect on racism and inequities in planning, especially that institutional and structural racism, and think about how they affect our living conditions, and then again, they influence our health behaviors and outcomes. So this framework, which was created by the Bay Area Health Inequities Initiative, also known as BARHI, you have to read this diagram from left to right. This graph helps to show how social inequities, so racism and other forms of discrimination, are reinforced by and implemented through institutions, which then in turn create differential living conditions, and then they influence our risk behaviors, our health behaviors, as well as ultimately whether we get diseases, injuries, and eventually mortality. Therefore, healthy communities are the places that foster positive health outcomes for all who live, work, or play in them. Research in multiple fields over many years has demonstrated strong associations between population health and a range of factors impacted by city policy and design interventions in the physical environment, including reduced environmental pollution, safe housing, access to services, and social inclusion. There are many policies, programs, and plans, as well as factors in our physical, social, and natural environments that influence our health outcomes and behaviors. Ensuring that Ventura's general plan promotes equity is one key step to promoting positive health outcomes and behaviors for all residents. So one recent example of Ventura residents actively working to advance healthy and equitable communities are the recent demonstrations against the Southern California Gas Company's proposal to expand the capacity of a methane gas compressor facility on North Olive Street in Ventura. As I mentioned earlier, the siting of polluting facilities in low-income communities or communities of color, such as on the West Side, is a classic example of racism in planning. Therefore, preventing the expansion of this facility is one step to achieving healthy communities in Ventura. Now, this movement for environmental justice is not new. It has a long history, and it's been a movement advocating for healthy and equitable communities for decades, both here in California and across the country. Whether it's the development of the field of epidemiology, like the case of the cholera outbreak in London during the 1800s, or the many community actions across the country with regards to issues of sanitary housing, or those tenements, exposure to toxins in the workplace, for example, farm workers and pesticides here in California, and the siting of toxic waste facilities. The movement for environmental justice has been advocating for healthy and equitable communities for many years. More recently, over the past couple of decades, the California legislature has been integrating environmental justice into the state's law. In 1999, California codified environmental justice into its statute and defined environmental justice as the fair treatment of people of all races, cultures, and incomes with respect to the development, adoption, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Then in 2008, the California legislature passed Senate Bill 535, which required the California Environmental Protection Agency to identify disadvantaged communities, otherwise known as DACs, and to allocate 25% of the state's cap and trade funds, those greenhouse gas reduction funds, to disadvantaged communities. And then in 2016, the state passed Senate Bill 1000, otherwise known as the Planning for Healthy Communities Act. And Senate Bill 1000 is important for all of us here today because it requires jurisdictions with disadvantaged communities to include an environmental justice element in their general plan and to adopt goals, policies, and actions that address environmental justice. I will be referring to Senate Bill 1000 throughout this presentation. So I just used the term disadvantaged community. This term is a very specific term in state law, and it's defined as a low-income area that is disproportionately affected by environmental pollution and other hazards that can lead to negative health effects, exposure, or environmental degradation. The key piece here is that a disadvantaged community is both low income and has a high pollution and health burden. Overall, there are 3 steps to developing an environmental justice element in accordance with Senate Bill 1000. Step 1 of analysis, Step 2 of engagement, and Step 3 of policy development. Within that Step 1 of analysis, the state's Office of Planning and Research recommends a very specific methodology for the disadvantaged community screening analysis. For the Ventura General Plan update, this first step of analysis has already been completed and can be found on the General Plan Updates website, planventura.com, under the Library tab, and was shared with all the GPAC members tonight ahead of time. We are now at the Step 2 of community engagement, specifically on health, equity, and environmental justice. And we want to get your ideas on goals, policies, and programs related to health, equity, and environmental justice that we should include as part of the general plan. Senate Bill 1000 also has 3 main goals: to reduce unique and compounded health risks in disadvantaged communities, to promote civic engagement in the public decision-making process, and to identify objectives and policies that prioritize improvements that then address the needs of disadvantaged communities. Senate Bill 1000 also has 5 specific topic areas that, at a minimum, must be analyzed as part of the environmental justice element. So they are to reduce pollution exposure, so anything related to air quality, water quality, soil quality, to promote food access, whether that's through grocery stores, farmers markets, community gardens, to promote physical activity, either through walkable, bikeable communities, access to transit, the safety of the transportation network in general, to promote public facilities, including access to parks, schools, health facilities, and finally, to promote safe and sanitary homes, which includes the location, quality, and affordability of housing. This presentation will present key data and information from the existing conditions report for each of these 5 topic areas, but if you're interested in any of these or all of these, please feel free to download the existing conditions report on the Plan Ventura website. All right, so now I'll be moving into those existing conditions related to health, equity, and environmental justice. And I'll first start off by presenting some overview demographic data of the city. First, although race and ethnicity is not a determinant of health on its own, as I described earlier, racism, particularly institutional and structural racism, is strongly correlated with poor health. As you can see from the charts, the majority of residents, about 56% in the city of Ventura, identify as non-Hispanic white, which is a higher proportion than the overall county. Among non-white residents, residents who identify as Hispanic and Latino make up the next largest proportion at 36%. The map on the right shows the distribution of the Hispanic Latino population across the city and as you can see, there are greater concentrations in the west side, southeast, and east side subareas. Income is particularly important for Senate Bill 1000 because we are required to assess for disadvantaged communities or those low-income areas also burdened by environmental pollution. Income is associated with being able to live in areas with access to services, being able to afford healthy foods, being able to afford quality housing, many indicators related to health and environmental justice. The map on the right shows the distribution of median household income by census tract across the city. Areas in darker shades of blue have a lower median household income. As you can see on the map, they are generally on the west side, downtown, and the southeast subareas. So the first topic of Senate Bill 1000 I'll be covering is related to reducing pollution exposure. It's the topic area most closely tied to environmental justice and the one which we have significant sources of data from the state. Exposure to pollution is a reality for communities of all sizes and types. Pollution exposure occurs daily in virtually every community when we come in contact directly with air, food, water, and soil contaminants. Historically, certain communities in Ventura have borne a greater concentration of polluting land uses. So here are the results of the existing conditions analysis for potential pollution burden. The data was gathered from the state's Cal EnviroScreen 3.0 tool, which measures and estimates relative pollution burden across the state at the census tract level. Based on state guidance, a neighborhood has a disproportionate pollution burden if that area is at or above the 75th percentile or that top fourth quartile that you see in red. Areas within Ventura scored above the 75th percentile threshold in the state for 9 pollution burden indicators. As you can see on the chart, the top pollution burden indicator is pesticides use, followed by groundwater threats, traffic density, and hazardous waste. The following set of maps I'll be presenting compare low-income areas against each of these top pollution indicators. So starting off with pesticides use, because this is the highest ranking pollutant in Ventura, this indicator in Cal EnviroScreen measures the total pounds of 83 selected active pesticide ingredients that are used in production agriculture. The percentage numbers you see in each census tracts on the map and all of the following pollution exposure maps I'll be showing are the percentile scores for those areas in comparison to the rest of the state. So for example, the census tract south of 101 that overlaps with the Arundel North Bank neighborhood, it has a 99% on it. That means that this area has a greater potential exposure to pesticides than 99% of all other census tracts in the state of California. Overall, 16 of 25 census tracts in Ventura rank above the 75th percentile statewide. As you can see, many areas in the city are at higher risk from potential exposure to pesticides in comparison to the rest of the state. From a health perspective, exposure to pesticides is associated with several poor health outcomes, including cancer, preterm births, hyperthyroidism, and brain abnormalities in children. So take a note of the red areas in this map, and then look at this map. Note that the areas with higher potential exposure to pesticides also happen to be the areas closer to unincorporated agricultural land uses. In other words, an unintended consequence of Ventura's Save Open Space and Agricultural Resources, also known as the SOAR initiative, is that residents are closer to and being exposed to pesticides that drift in from these neighboring unincorporated areas. Therefore, there may be health benefits to either converting some of these nearby agricultural areas to other land uses or requiring that these land uses adopt more sustainable agricultural practices. Groundwater threats is the second highest ranking pollutant in Ventura. This indicator measures proximity to potential sources of groundwater contamination, such as leaking underground storage tanks, oil and gas facilities, animal feeding operations, and other industrial sites. 7 of 25 census tracts in Ventura rank above that 75th percentile threshold statewide. Again, from a health perspective, depending on the type of groundwater pollutant, These pollutants are typically associated with cancer, learning disabilities, pregnancy risks, and what's known as blue baby syndrome. Hazardous waste generators and facilities is tied for the third highest ranking pollutant. This indicator measures proximity to permitted hazardous waste facilities, hazardous waste generators, and chrome plating facilities within each census tract. Historically, this has been the primary environmental justice concern in California because of the siting of toxic waste facilities. 5 of 25 census tracts in Ventura rank above that 75th percentile threshold statewide. From a health perspective, proximity to these hazardous waste sites is associated with diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and respiratory diseases. So I'm going to very briefly show again the groundwater threats. Take note of the areas in red. Then I'm going to show the hazardous waste generators and facilities. Again, take note of the areas in red. And now here's a map of the industrial land uses in the city. Note that generally the areas with higher potential exposure from hazardous waste and groundwater threats also happen to be the areas closer to greater concentration of industrial land uses. So finally, traffic density is also tied for the third highest ranking pollutant in Ventura. It measures the adjusted sum of traffic volumes within each census tract. 5 of 25 census tracts in Ventura rank above the 75th percentile threshold statewide. From a health perspective, air pollution from high density traffic has many is associated with many poor health outcomes. There's a very large body of literature around this. And these health outcomes include preterm births, low birth weights, autism, asthma, reduced lung function, heart disease, stroke, cancer, and most notably traffic mortalities. Note that the areas, again, so the red areas, take note of the red areas on this map, and then I'll show the highway interchanges. Note that the areas with higher potential exposure from traffic-related air pollution also happen to be the areas near the intersection of Highway 101 and Highway 126. Finally, in terms of oil and gas facilities, the city lies between several active oil and gas fields, most of which have active facilities and operations on site. Neighborhoods impacted include West Side, North Avenue, Marina, Arndale North Bank, and the East Side. Living close to oil drilling activities can have serious health impacts on both residents, but particularly children, older adults, and those with chronic health conditions. Specifically, public health researchers have found that living within 1,500 feet of these oil and gas facilities can result in higher rates of nose and throat irritation, sinus problems, eye burning, severe headaches, loss of sense of smell, persistent cough, frequent nosebleeds, and swollen, painful joints. The oil and gas industry in Ventura can actually easily be seen from satellite views on Google Maps. After over a century of oil and gas development, the industry has left a physical imprint on the land and the urban form of the region. It's important to note that the history of Ventura is fundamentally tied to oil and gas. The city grew up around oil and gas, it benefited economically, residents have been now struggling with the health consequences, and residents must now decide how to manage this relationship moving forward. So in totality, based on the full analysis of income and pollution burden, which again, you can find on the planventura.com website, the general plan team found that there are 11 potential disadvantaged communities in Ventura. These disadvantaged communities have disproportionate environmental burdens that impact their health outcomes. Because of Senate Bill 1000, the general plan team is legally required to include goals, policies, and actions that address environmental justice in the general plan. However, the city has been concerned about these health, equity, and environmental justice issues long before Senate Bill 1000 was passed a few years ago. These topics are critical to get right because they directly impact residents' lives, health, and well-being. The city also wants us all to reflect on how past decisions were done inequitably and to think critically about how to uplift health, equity, and environmental justice into the general plan moving forward. So I've been talking to you all for a really long time. We're going to take a short poll break. Lily, when you get the chance, please pop up the poll question. Great. So the question is, it's multiple choice. While all topics will be covered in the general plan, which of the following pollution exposure indicators do you feel is the most important issue for the city of Ventura? So I only covered the top ones, which were pesticides use, groundwater threats, traffic-related air pollution, and hazardous waste facilities. However, as you can see, we've included all of the pollution burden indicators that are measured by the state. I'll give you all about a minute to respond. Okay. So I'm seeing about 38% or so for pesticides use, 18% for groundwater threats, 17%, about 14% for traffic-related air pollution, and then smaller amounts for some of the other ones, including hazardous waste, oil and gas, drinking water contaminants. Thank you, everyone. Oh, okay. Do you all see the results on your end now? Yes, okay. Thank you, Lily. Okay, moving on. In addition to pollution exposure, Senate Bill 1000 requires us all to assess existing conditions for other topic areas, including, again, food access, physical activity, public facilities, housing, and just generally health outcomes and behaviors. So on that first topic of food access, food and proper nutrition are essential for all ages. Because food directly affects nutrition and weight, a healthy food environment is a prerequisite for a healthy city. The city of Ventura is generally well served with respect to food choices. According to the Economic Development Existing Conditions Report, Ventura has 39 stores classified as supermarkets or other grocery stores, and an additional 78 specialty markets, convenience stores, and beverage stores. Taken together, in the 2018 data, Ventura had 1.4 large grocery stores per 10,000 residents, which is the second highest ratio of all cities in the county, and 40% higher than the county average overall, which was 1 store per 10,000 residents. In addition, as of 2019, the city had 4 farmers markets and 3 active community gardens, with 2 more under construction. Park access refers to the ability of residents, visitors, or employees of the workforce to access public parks conveniently. This map shows walking distances from each park in 5-minute increments. As of 2018, overall, about 47% of the city's residential areas, including downtown, are within a half mile, which is about a 10-minute walk distance to a park. This 10-minute distance standard is common for cities that are more built out, such as Ventura's, as there are fewer areas remaining for development. Areas that are beyond a 20-minute walk from a park, those areas in light pink, are generally considered park poor and are good candidates for additional park space as part of the general plan update. This map shows transit accessibility to public facilities and services. In areas well served by public transit, residents have access to parks, libraries, healthcare facilities, and other public facilities in Ventura. While most areas of the city are served by public transit, there is limited frequency on key arterials and corridors, and thus there are opportunities for improved service frequencies. Additionally, while the city does not provide public transit, it owns and maintains transit facilities. Therefore, there are opportunities for improvements to transit facilities, as well as completing sidewalks, improving lighting, and expanding waiting areas to make transit use more attractive. By increasing the quality and frequency of public transportation, it's important because it will attract more users and decrease automobile use, which in turn drives down vehicle emissions and improves local air quality and public health. This chart shows housing cost burden by tenure. Cost burden is defined as a household paying more than 30% of their income on housing. Overall, about 40% of households who are cost burden in the city, households in Ventura are cost burden in the city, which is roughly the same as the statewide average of 41% of households who are cost burden. However, note that housing cost burden is much more prevalent among extremely low, very low, and low-income households. Households who are cost burdened from a health perspective are less able to afford healthy foods, recreational activities, medicines, and healthcare visits, all of which impact health, and they are also more at risk for displacement. Overcrowding is also closely tied to poor health outcomes, either from higher rates of stress, psychological stress, as well as a more rapid spread of infectious diseases, as we've all learned over the past year and a half. As shown in the table, nearly 4% of all households in Ventura are overcrowded, including about 1% of owner-occupied households and about 7% of renter-occupied households. Renter-occupied households were also more likely to be severely overcrowded. Overall, about 3.8% of households in the city are overcrowded, which is actually a much lower rate than the statewide proportion of 9.1% of households that are overcrowded. Infants born weighing less than 3,500 grams, which is about 5.5 pounds, are classified as low birth weight. 4 of 25 census tracts in Ventura rank above that 75th percentile threshold statewide for low birth weight. Low birth weight is a key marker of population health. Infants born weighing less than 5.5 pounds are more likely to be diagnosed later in life with asthma, coronary heart disease, ADHD, and other behavioral problems. Public health researchers have found that the risk of low birth weight increases with closer proximity to highways, high traffic roadways, oil and gas facilities, and pesticide activities. Now, health outcomes specifically among children and youth. This chart presents a few health outcomes that are tracked by the California Health Interview Survey. In terms of asthma, Ventura has lower rates of children and youth with asthma than the state, and just a slightly higher rate than the rest of the county. In terms of obesity, Ventura also has a lower rate of overweight children compared to the rest of the state, and a similar rate than the rest of the county. In terms of physical activity, while schools have increased requirements for physical activity in recent years, many children and youth in Ventura do need more exercise. Only about 13% of Ventura children and youth exercise regularly, which is lower than the statewide rate of 16.5%. In other words, the vast majority, over 85% of Ventura children and youth do not exercise regularly. Thus, creating policies and actions to make physical activity more convenient and attractive will go a long ways to improving health outcomes for children and youth in Ventura. Now, similarly, this chart presents a few health outcomes tracked by the California Health Interview Survey for adults. In terms of asthma, Ventura also has lower rates of adults with asthma than the state, and just a slightly higher rate than the county. In terms of heart disease, Ventura has a slightly higher rate among adults with heart disease than the state and the county, but the differences are fairly marginal. In terms of obesity, Ventura has a lower rate of obesity compared to adults across the state, and a similar rate to the rest of the county. And finally, in terms of physical activity, Ventura has a higher rate of physical activity among adults compared to the state, and a similar rate to the rest of the county, which may be reflective of Ventura's active living environment for adults. So in conclusion, when it comes to health, equity, and environmental justice, Ventura has several strengths as well as some areas for growth. Ventura has an active living environment and generally good access to healthy foods, which are important for physical activity and good nutrition. Ventura also has lower rates of overcrowding, obesity, and asthma than the rest of the state. However, there are several disadvantaged communities within Ventura that have a high potential pollution exposure to pesticides, groundwater threats, hazardous waste facilities, traffic-related air pollution, and oil and gas facilities, among other pollution burden indicators, other sources of pollution. And there is also limited access to neighborhood parks and lower rates of physical activity among children and youth. So we're going to do another poll question right now. Lily, please activate the Zoom poll. So this question asks, which of the following Senate Bill 1000 topic areas do you feel is the most important issue for the city of Ventura? So we have, again, those 5 topic areas: pollution exposure, food access, physical activity, public facilities, and housing. All right, so far, not sure if you all can see the results on your end. I'm seeing about half of all respondents so far have chosen reducing pollution exposure, and then second highest being promoting physical activity with lower rates for housing and public facilities and food. All right, thank you, everyone. So finally, the last section is on best practices. I'll be brief on this one. Generally, when it comes to trying to integrate equity into a general plan, there are 3 approaches and processes: procedural equity, distributional equity, and structural equity. Procedural equity is all about creating transparent, fair, and inclusive processes and working to increase civic engagement opportunities for all residents, such as this educational forum today. Distributional equity is about fairly distributing resources, benefits, and burdens, as well as prioritizing resources for communities that experience the greatest inequities and unmet needs. And finally, structural equity is about making a commitment to correct past harms and preventing future unintended consequences, as well as addressing structural and institutional systems that are the root cause of these inequities. Specifically in terms of environmental justice, there's actually a growing collection of jurisdictions who have now already completed their environmental justice elements and have been praised by the state as best practices for their efforts to advance environmental justice through their general plan. So here we've just presented a few example goals and policies for each of the Senate Bill 1000 topic areas. There's a lot of text on the slide, but so let's look at a couple examples. you will identify reducing pollution exposure. So one example that was adopted by the city of Marietta in Riverside County calls for encouraging and educating residents and businesses to implement integrated pest management principles and reduce or discontinue the use of pesticides and herbicides on their property. And I believe the second highest was physical activity that you all identified. So a GORE policy that was adopted by the city of Sacramento up in Northern California is the city shall encourage the planning of new communities and revitalization of existing urban areas to achieve improvement in overall public health by encouraging a healthier living environment that includes walkable neighborhoods, access to recreation and open space, healthy foods, medical services, and public transit. So finally, integrating all of these important issues of health, equity, and environmental justice isn't solely through the environmental justice element. The general plan team will be integrating these into all the other elements because that is a best practice. And so, for example, within the housing element, there can be policies that incentivize affordable housing or eliminate exclusionary zoning practices. If we want to improve physical activity through the transportation and mobility element, we can include policies to build more safe and active transportation infrastructure. We can improve transit access. And at a more institutional level, the city can integrate policies to improve diversity in hiring, participate in racial equity trainings, and improve access to government meetings and services for all residents. So during this stage 2, during this process of community engagement, we want to get your ideas for what types of goals, policies, and actions we should include not only in the environmental justice element, but throughout the general plan. So with that, that's the end of the presentation, and I'll be passing it back to Matt, who will be facilitating the discussion and Q&A.
Okay. Thank you, Juan. We understand that was a lot of information. The existing conditions report has even more than that. Juan is an expert on public health and on planning. There are very few people who have that joint skill of understanding and joint education of public health and planning. We really did get into a lot of detail. Juan is here and can answer questions. If we can go to the next slide, what we would like to do, we have about an hour and a half left. We were supposed to go till 8:30. So we have an hour and a half left. And we want to hear first from the GPAC and then from the public, because that's the order that we have done these meetings in. First is, what questions do you have about any of the information that was presented? It was a lot there. And if you have follow-on questions, we'd love to hear what they are. Next, we want to hear your opinions of what are the key health, equity, and environmental justice issues in the community. We're wondering whether what was presented in terms of what we saw through the data as what we saw through the data, whether that actually rings true with your experience in the community. Was there anything surprising? Was there anything you're like, yep, that's right on? And then finally, kind of thinking forward, what's your vision for a healthy, equitable, and environmentally just community? We know that when we've done these educational forums, you don't always track with these questions, and that's okay. These are really prompts for you. And so what we're going to do is we're going to stop sharing the screen now. We'll put the questions in the chat, and then we can start taking questions. And again, we're going to start with GPAC members and then move through other community members as well, and we can circle back. So again, we have plenty of time, and we can explore some of these topics in detail. Okay, great. So I am going to start with Kelsey.
Hi, thanks. I have a pretty basic question. Whose decision was it to center the plan on equity over equality? Is it something that's state mandated, or was it something that you guys decided?
That was something that it's common practice to focus on equity because equity provides individuals it's a philosophy to provide individuals with what they need rather than the same for everyone. And in fact, it's been policies of equity that have policies of equality that have not necessarily gotten us to a good place. So it really is important for us to focus on equity because people have been disadvantaged in the past, and we need to make sure that we are addressing those disadvantages now and rectifying those.
Is that, I mean, I feel like that's a very polarizing concept right now in terms of making that decision.
Well, we can certainly bring that up as a topic of conversation. I guess I'd love to hear what other GPAC members think about that as well. Kelsey, did you have another, thank you for your question. Did you have another question? Okay, thanks. Let's see. Nick, you're next.
And I'm never sure if it's if I'm the right Nick, but I'll take it.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't find it polarizing at all. I think that this discussion is long overdue. I attended a housing conference this year virtually where it was really made apparent to me that we've used zoning as a way of segregating and separating people for many, many, many years. And as long as I've been in this practice of planning and architecture, it never hit me with the clarity that it did at that conference. So I think it's long overdue, and I really appreciate that we're having the dialogue. And I know that these things get stratified by certain, methodologies and orders, but I was surprised that economics, job access to jobs and to education weren't an intrinsic part of the dialogue when we talk about equity. And, I know it's a very complex realm to discuss, but I think that economic jobs, balance, education, all of those things play into this so significantly. So I'm not sure where that fits into the dialogue, but I'd sure like to find out.
Juan, do you want to address that?
Yeah, so as part of the existing conditions report, we stuck mostly within the guidance from the Office of Planning and Research, those five topic areas. The economic development piece that you're referring to has more been addressed to the economic development existing conditions analysis report, and as part will be integrated as part of the economic development chapter of the general plan. Education historically has not been a topic area within a general plan, as that's mostly controlled by school districts as opposed to the city. However, there are ways to work with school districts around joint use agreements to ensure that ball fields, playgrounds are able to be used after hours for physical activity, for community events, community facilities, gymnasiums. That is typically the way that education is addressed and schools are addressed to the general plan.
But Nick, we are looking at all of these holistically, and you're right that jobs lead, and education leads to jobs, and jobs lead to income, and income is a predictor of health, as we talked about. So they are related, and we are going to connect them. We focused on a few topics. We did go on a lot, but yeah, I think it is something we need to address together because they are integrated.
Thank you. And I'd really like to see a map that overlaid where the good paying jobs are. And I think we do need strategies for areas like the West Side and other parts of the community where we can make sure that people do have access to diverse types of employment. As your maps showed, it's been very historically industrial, oil-related jobs on the West Side and completely other types of jobs in other parts of the community. Very interesting the way that things have been segregated, probably unconsciously. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's an important point. That's what the institutional racism sometimes is. It's actually unconscious. And it's important to remember that. Okay, let's see. Bill McReynolds, go ahead.
Yeah, so I've got, I guess, two questions. One, I was looking at slide 37, which identifies, I believe you said there's 11 disadvantaged communities identified in Ventura, in the city of Ventura. and then it's the outreach. So we're sitting here on Zoom, which is great. You know, I'm sitting here in my office, which is all good. But how are we outreaching to those 11 communities? It can't be through this process right here. I mean, we are not reaching those 11 communities by any stretch of the imagination. How is Ramey and Associates going to reach out to those 11 communities?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So just to be clear, we're sort of at that bridge between phase 1 and phase 2 of the work that we're doing. So we are going to set up a series of focus group meetings in different communities. We're going to go out and talk with people individually, people who wouldn't necessarily come out to these meetings, and we're going to have more focused conversations around these health, equity, and environmental justice issues. Because Bill, you're right, this is not really the forum where a lot of the people in the disadvantaged communities are coming out and sharing their ideas. So we're going to be going out to those communities in the fall and leading a series of meetings and focus groups to really address these topics as well. So
okay,
you're absolutely correct.
Okay, and my follow-up question is slide 29, which is regarding the agricultural uses, which were identified as all being, excuse me, in SOAR areas, so which are outside of the city jurisdiction. So is it the idea of the general plan that we will implement policies encouraging the county ag commissioner to stop using pesticides in those areas?
So, you know, I think that's an important point.
Just going back to your Murrieta example, you were using the city, it was within the city jurisdiction.
Yeah.
These are not within the city jurisdiction. We have no, so unless there's a policy that the city council shall every opportunity remind the county ag commissioner to stop using pesticides, I don't understand what's available.
Yeah, no, I think we need to look at what's available. I mean, I think it is critical. It's clearly a critical issue in the community. And I think we need to explore how the city can address the impacts that are happening in the city because of activities going on outside of the city. And so we do have interjurisdictional challenges related to that topic. You're right. Okay, Daniel, you're up next.
Yeah, I have kind of an elemental question going back to the slides in the poll. Is our groundwater in any jeopardy?
I am not aware. I don't know the answer to that question. Juan, I don't know if you know. We've been looking at sort of state level data that's provided, which is what's required for this, but it is certainly one of the areas to potentially look at. What's your sense of it, and do others know?
I think it depends on what part of the community we're looking in. The west side, I think there are issues. We don't know about other parts of the community.
The data from Cowan virus screen does not mean that water is or is not good to drink within the community. It basically says that there is the potential for exposure. So there might be, for example, a oil and gas station where you pump gas into your car. There is a potential for one of the underground storage tanks to begin leaking. So a lot of this data that's part of the Cowan virus screen, it's always important to take it, to consider these indicators with some type of asterisk, in that they are state level data, and it doesn't mean that you are being exposed to that. There is the potential for exposure to that pollutant. I hope that answered your question.
You did. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Steph, you're next.
Hey, can you hear me? Okay. First off, thank you, Juan. That was an awesome presentation, and I'm really happy we're having this discussion today. I want to echo what Bill was referencing in terms of the pesticides, and really want to echo just how critical it is to make sure that we can put some kind of policy or legislation on pesticide usage in Ventura. I specifically have personal experiences with it. I biked to work through the Barranca, through that strawberry field that is between Industrial Park and Harbor Boulevard to get into Pierpont. And on multiple occasions, early in the morning, I'll be biking through there and pass by folks in straight up hazmat suits, spraying stuff. And like, I'm heavy breathing on my bicycle while they're just like in hazmat suits spraying stuff. Like, it is sketchy. And so I definitely would like to learn more about how we could set policies in the city of Ventura around those SOAR fields.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these that certainly came up as clearly one of the top issues. So I think, yes, we need to explore that. And again, as Bill mentioned, it's a challenge because you have county decisions being made that impact the city of Ventura. All right, let's see, Pete, you're next.
Yeah, on the hazardous waste map, I noticed an area out on the east end is like west of Wells, north of Telegraph, that said it's a hazardous waste area there. And I was wondering if you have a possibility to know who those hazardous waste generators are. And also I noticed that overlaid with the low birth weight right up top of it. As far as I know, that's just residential and agricultural in that area. So I was just wondering who those generators might be, if possible, and where the data comes from, I guess.
Yeah, well, let me actually start with where the data comes from, because part of what we do in step 2 of our process is to kind of field check the data. So the data is actually from the state, and so it's statewide data that comes to us, and this is the process that we go through as part of identifying the preliminary identification of disadvantaged communities. The next step is we have to check some of this out, and we have to talk to the community and see what you all know about this, and then we need to dive deeper into some of the data where the issues are identified. I don't know of any specifically, and again, if others have an idea, then certainly you all can chime in with that. But we are limited. I mean, we've had this challenge before with the Cal and virus screen data, which is you're given the state data and you got to kind of ultimately check it for accuracy, and that's what the working with the community is about in phase 2, which we're entering into.
So Matt,
Yeah.
there is an Edison facility right out there in that section of town. That may be what it's referencing. I'm not sure what exactly goes on there, but it's a pretty extensive, like their headquarters basically. And then some of those power lines are running through that area as well.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Or Phil, sorry. I've worked for Edison for 34 years, and I'm totally familiar with those facilities. And yes, there's some hazardous waste generated. Believe me, it's really contained because they get inspected by the county, if not or usually more frequently than monthly, but at least monthly. So
yeah,
maybe they're just the general waste is generated there.
Yeah, and that's the way it's done. It's not necessarily that there is pollution, it's that there are areas that have the potential for pollution, right? So it could be that it is that PG&E facility if there are hazardous waste there.
Yeah,
okay.
Thanks, Pete. I just wanted to add, that's also why when we created the overall disadvantaged communities map, we use the term potential disadvantaged communities, because we need to hear from you all whether this data makes sense, verify whether these are the right disadvantaged communities, whether actually, like Pete, you're mentioning, maybe these facilities aren't actually reducing or releasing pollution. So all of this feedback is important.
Dana.
Thank you. 2 things. I have a slightly noisy dog and a spotty internet connection lately. So those 2 things might come up. Part of your question is just what stood out and what surprised. What stood out to me was the areas with pesticide issues are near SOAR properties, and it's just the law of unintended consequences at work that I found intriguing. Also, I think this may be a place I have been thinking about this a lot overall in, beyond Ventura and our culture, and I don't know what the plan can do about this, but redlining has been, it was actually overtly written into codes for a while, and then it's been there for so long it's sort of become almost these unwritten anymore dividing lines. And as a beneficiary, there it goes. Anyways, as someone who has actually benefited both generationally and currently from redlining, I don't know what to do to undo that inequity. It's big, it's deep, and I just want to be part of doing that. I am uncertain how we can address those kinds of issues in this plan as a GPAC, encouraging that. And then, what does my ideal city look like? I don't know where the polluting facilities need to go. And what we do, because they exist, et cetera. And yet in my, the place I would like to go, my equitable and healthy vision is that, we certainly don't put schools next to toxic waste sites, which I've seen in Ventura and beyond. And we don't just park them in the places where people have less political, economic influence, et cetera, as they have been placed in the past. I mean, I've always noted that. I know this isn't Ventura, but that gnarly power plant right on the coast is in it seems in Oxnard. Seems to me that there's a it's not coincidental that is there. So those are my issues that I'm concerned about. I think affordable housing comes into all of that on some level. And so just commentary, and questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Alejandra.
Yeah, hi, thank you for the presentation. I think as far as like key issues, I live on the west side, so I think every issue, if you just kind of scroll through the maps, the west side pretty much suffers from everything that was highlighted. So I guess the west side, every issue is applicable to that side of town. I think a vision for the city, I think a policy that supports every community in the city. Every community has some sort of impact. So a policy that's the same for every city. But I think out of those policies, we need to have programs that actually are implemented and support those DACs that suffer more than the rest of the cities. So policy is great to kind of cover every community and solve our pollutants issue. That's the main issue. But then there needs to be programs under that are focused on these DACs that have more than one issue that impacts them. The West Side has maybe 8 issues out of the 10. So maybe we need to have more programs that focus on that and an overarching policy that just supports the entire city. So just thank you for documenting the West Side and what's actually happening and been happening throughout the years there. So that was good to see that.
Thank you. And clearly with our engagement is going to focus quite a bit on the West Side because there are compounding issues which we had heard about at the beginning of the process, and they bear themselves out in these maps. It's pretty obvious that you're seeing a lot of the overlap of environmental pollution, but also income and housing issues. They're all sort of in the same area. So it is a compounding issue. And so yes, definitely some of our engagement a lot of our engagements on this topic is going to focus on the West Side. And then the plan needs to address how to deal with those inequities in the future. Okay, I'm going to go to Philip. Kelsey, you had a comment, so I'm going to go to a few others first and then come back to you. Philip, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the areas I didn't see really touched on, maybe because it's actually not necessarily in the city proper, but in the riverbed, there's quite a bit of trash, and also in the drainage, in the cities, rainwater going down into the arroyos and so forth, going out to the ocean, and the beaches then become polluted. But the riverbed itself, there's a lot of trash for reasons that we are aware of in terms of homeless. The city, I understand, does control at least a portion of that riverbed, as well as like the land trust and a few other institutions. So I'm wondering how that kind of gets addressed in this issue about environment, and seeing that that's a big asset to the city, and it's the riverbed specifically is kind of a dumping ground sometimes.
Yeah, I think it is something, I don't have an answer for how it's going to get addressed. I think that's something that has come up in multiple meetings, and it's something that I think we need to focus on figuring out what are the solutions for that, implementation, enforcement, and other things. So I think we'll need to think together. If you have ideas, shoot them our way, definitely. Okay, any other, Phil, anything else while you're?
Well, just wondering what category that would come under, if it would be under, it's not really groundwater. It's, it's a surface water and ties into homelessness and everything else. But I mean, that's, the main thing is the trash that's in those areas.
Yeah.
And then the pollution ends up on the beaches.
Yeah, I honestly don't know where we would put it, but I think right now it's about identifying what the issues are and categorizing them can happen later.
Okay.
Okay, Scott.
First of all, excellent presentation and an excellent use of data and information overlays to give a really good picture of what some of the issues are affecting in the city. So my kudos on that. Instead of trying to dive into solutions tonight, which I don't think you're looking for necessarily, but I think you're looking for validation of whether or not the environmental justice issues presented in this report are appropriate and valid. And with regard to that, I give my full support to each and every one of the issues that was brought up. So I think that we as the GPAC and as the public would be well advised to address all of those issues. I think all of them are important, and I look forward to tackling those, each and every one within the general plan as we go forward.
Yeah, and Scott, question for you as well as for everyone, GPAC and members of the public, is there anything, are we missing any topics? Are there any environmental justice issues that we missed in the presentation that you feel like are important in the community that we didn't touch on? And we need to hear that not only from you all, but from the engagement that we're going to do.
Personally, for me, I've been racking my brain ever since I first saw the presentation, reviewed it earlier today prior to the meeting. And I can't think of any. If there are others, it would be wonderful if people can come up with them. But personally, I think everything on my list was hit very well.
Great. And so others, please chime in as well when you can raise your hand and we'll get to you. Okay, Kelsey.
I would echo what Philip said regarding the river bottom. I think it's a really beautiful natural resource that's right outside the west side, and it's kind of been left to complete pollution and disrepair. So I think if we could find a way to make that a place that people were able to enjoy, that'd be really beneficial. And then in terms of something that really shocked me, in the additional reading that you gave us, it was on physical health, and the statistics provided were that 35% of all youth are overweight or obese, and that only 25 to 30% can pass physical fitness tests at schools. And I feel like that's something that it doesn't bode well for the future of our community, and something we could really pay attention to. Maybe we can do things like, promoting gardening programs in schools, or ways to increase physical activity, especially since, we can have some influence of people while they're at their school. So my thoughts on that.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, that was, we noticed that as well. Scary statistic when you think about the future. Okay, other GPAC members, and we can circle back if you have other things. Let me do Pete, and then we'll move on to members of the public. And Matt, you'll be first.
Got to unmute there. Sorry. Yeah, I was just wondering what data is used for the traffic, because it showed the west side is having very low traffic impact, and if you live out here, I don't think that happens. And also, the school grounds count as parks or other public space.
So that was a question on the second one. Do school grounds count?
Yeah. So two questions: one, traffic data, and two, school grounds.
I can answer the first one. The data is from the California Environmental Health Tracking Program, the U.S. Department of Transportation, as well as the California Department of Public Health. And so it measures an adjusted sum of traffic volumes within each census tract or within each area.
Okay, so that's the technical answer to that one. The other answer to it is, what I'm hearing you say is that you feel like it wasn't met, that there's an issue with traffic on the west side in terms of air, pollution from traffic that is maybe not reflected in the data.
Correct.
Okay, so that's certainly something we can look at as an issue. Okay, great. Casey, I see you have your hand up, but I had already said Matt was going to talk, so I'm going to let him go first, and then we can come back to you. Okay, Mr. Bello, go ahead.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. My name is Matt Bello. I'm a resident of the West Side, and I'm a member of the West Side Clean Air Coalition. It's a formation that came about this year when we discovered more about the gas compressor behind EP Foster. It's a multi-ethnic, multi-lingual organization. We have a lot of Spanish speakers involved, and it's a really exciting formation. And we're trying to look at the future of the neighborhood and see how we could really clean up the various pollutants. A few questions that we had regarding zoning, since we are in the GPAC and we want to see what real teeth we could have with this, are can we change industrial zone sites near homes and schools to housing or commercial zoning? Can we change the terms of the existing M3 zoning to limit the use and allow properties to be subject to an amortization period before its industrial process is terminated? Can we force new zoning terms to be subject to monitoring or inspections by the city on an ongoing basis? Can we require, upon termination of the compressor use, like if we're focused, we want to focus not just on the compressor site, but on the various sites in our neighborhood that are poisoning it, that are affecting our air. But can we require, upon termination of the compressor site or other sites, that the site be cleared of all equipment, piping, contamination, etc.? Can we require SoCal Gas or other companies to post a bond to ensure the restoration of these sites when they do leave these sites? And can we use the zoning code amendments to notify the CPUC if the use is put into an amortization period and is expiring, so that they're aware of that? We walk the neighborhood. We're pretty familiar with the neighborhood. I think I mentioned to Matt Ramey in our Westside Community Council, we have a powder coat spray company on Olive that sprays in the open air, and then there's homes right across the street. We have all kinds of huge warehouses. We don't know exactly what's going on. So beyond just those questions that I just listed, what I think we would really like is a really thorough survey of all of the permits that have been placed on the west side and other affected areas. And we look at those and really see that maybe these permits were approved 50, 75, 100, maybe even longer, a long time ago, and see if we now know that there's empirical evidence that this is going to affect our residents' health. And if that's the case, then we really do need to come up with more aggressive zoning and try to get these industries in a place that's not so close to homes, such as Market Street. So we really want to work closely with you guys to scrutinize our neighborhood and of course have solidarity with other neighborhoods that are dealing with the same situations. But we really want to look at some of the practical zoning solutions that we could have for that. And then one other point that I have, just talking about equity issues regarding transportation. I know last week the city council approved using all of our transportation mitigation fees towards a kind of this interesting project over near the Ventura car dealerships, where we're using all of our $19.5 million of traffic mitigation fees that we've collected over how long, I'm not sure. I do have an email out waiting for that response, but it seems a little bit alarming that, the west side, Montalvo, the Wells corridor, these are historically impoverished areas, have seen an incredible amount of development, yet it seems like all the mitigation fees are going towards Johnson Drive right now. And I actually think that is going to affect our environmental health. So I would like that addressed by the GPAC as well. Max, stop. Sorry. Okay, and I'll shut up.
Thank you. Just if I could quickly respond. So first, I want to commend you and your team for beginning to think about all of these solutions. And I think we can explore together what the powers of zoning can do and the general plan can do to address these issues. And then we would actually love to get together with your coalition, walk the neighborhood with you, and have a focus group to really talk about the West Side and what are the issues there. So we'll have to set that up sometime in the next month or so we can come out and meet you. And we'd love to talk about this with you in more detail. Okay, Casey.
Hi, everybody. First off, I just want to say thank you so much, Juan. That presentation was fantastic. You took a ton of complex issues and really distilled them down in a very accessible way. I really appreciated it. And secondly, this is circling way back, but I do think equity, not equality, is the right marker for us to be seeking as GPAC if we want Ventura to be its best self moving forward. And that kind of brings me back to something I've been weighing about bringing up, and I'm adding a layer of complexity, not solutions, but it seems like that's where we're at right now. So I'm going to say it. It kind of goes back to what Kelsey was saying about when we look at our young Venturans, we've got higher rates of obesity, lower rates of physical activity, and honestly touches on what Matthew was saying about the compressor. We have historically, I think, in our planning, thought sort of long term, like 5 to 10 years. And we really, I don't, again, have a solution here, but I would task us with thinking longer term about, I think we're quick to say like, oh, the solution is stop using pesticides, but pesticides are an integral part of our farming community right now, which is an integral part of our community at large. So there's not a solution there, but I think if we as a GPAC and as a community can be really open to diving deeper on these issues versus applying quick solutions, we'll create a more sustainable plan moving forward. Again, that's not a solution. It's just something that I thought would maybe be helpful to bear in mind moving forward.
Yeah, no, Casey, those are great points. I mean, this is a long range plan, and it is difficult sometimes for us as human nature to think more than 5 to 10 years out, even a couple of years out. Like it's hard for us to plan and think that way, but I think this process really requires us to do that. And I think what's interesting about the presentation that Juan did is that he showed some examples of decisions that were made decades ago that are still impacting our society today. And so we need to recognize what the consequences of those decisions are to the best of our abilities. We may not get everything right, but we need to at least recognize and have that as a filter. And we sort of owe that to future generations to do that. So, I think you're right on. And I second that there's not necessarily an answer right now to that. And it takes hard work and thought. This is a great group to deal with, though. So thank you for that comment. Let's see, Alejandra.
I had a just quick question. You mentioned about additional policy topics, and I know you have it here as safe and sanitary homes, and I think that was like the housing cost and overcrowding, but I'm not sure if it's also addressed the old housing stock that we have, and that's a lot in a lot of different areas in the city that sometimes usually doesn't mean a healthy home. They're not set up for the changes in the climate, the hotter days and the colder days. Well, so far hotter days, not colder. So I don't know if there's a way that we can address our already built and aging infrastructure of our housing, because we're stuck with it unless we do some heavy remodeling.
Yeah. Yes, and a lot of times the safe and healthy homes looks at the age of the housing relative to lead paint and uses that as a proxy. But I think what you're doing is you're actually looking forward and thinking about the impacts that are going to be coming out that are going to be happening from climate change and how we adapt now to be more resilient in the future.
Yeah, I mean, just from climate change and stuff, and just from the pollution happening already, right? Just immediately, the next couple of years, if there's a way to kind of retrofit those homes and make them healthier in the sense that there's no outside pollutants coming in.
It's a good, thank you. A great suggestion. All right, Nicholas.
A couple of things, and now I got distracted. I'm trying to remember what it was. I'm wondering if there's any representatives of the farming community amongst us, or if there was an intentional, outreach to them, or I'm sure it's not too late to do that, to have some dialogue about I think we all agree that preserving the farmlands is important, but it is an unintended consequence that it means we're living next to essentially industrial uses. What is the feasibility of encouraging or supporting our local farmers to move towards more organic practices? What is the nexus between community and farming in that regard? That would be very interesting to find out. I've also seen some discussion in the comments about farm worker housing, and I'm wondering if any farm worker population are represented amongst us. I know that our firm has been involved in several farm worker housing projects, and I know that there are efforts to provide housing in Ventura for farm workers. I'm not sure what the real demand numbers are versus what we've been able to provide, and that would be interesting to find out. As we talk about preserving farmland, we have to look at what the community can and needs to do to help facilitate that and to make sure that the farming community is a part of our community.
Yeah, thanks. We did not explicitly reach out to the farm worker and the farming community for this, but I think that, you know, moving forward, it can be part of the conversation for solutions. Abigail?
Hi, thanks. Sorry for not having my camera on. My internet's been not good. I just wanted to comment that there was mentioned that the food access was good in the city. And I would say that it's not great and equitable in the east side of the city. Some of the neighborhoods are densely populated and pretty far from healthy food choices. There are quite a few convenience stores and liquor stores, but not so much as far as actual grocery stores with good food.
Yeah. Interestingly, I was looking, and the map. I believe the map of the healthy food is in the report, and you'll see like overall it's pretty good, but you can see on the west side that there is a lack of healthy food.
I mentioned the east side as well.
Sorry, east side of the city. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Luis.
Yes.
I wanted to kind of add to Nick's comment. For ag coordination, it would be great if the city would come and do a presentation at APAC, the Agricultural Policy Advisory Committee for Ventura County. They generally meet monthly, and they really represent the ag community as a whole in the county and can probably share a lot of insights about, you know, the type of farming that happens around Ventura City, what the regulations are for pesticide use, what really could be the exposure currently, etc. They would be a great group to reach out to. And they understand general plans because they just went through the county general plan. So,
okay.
And then this hasn't come up, and I'm not sure if it really fits, but you know, if we're talking equity, I think we really need to also be very cognizant of education and access to public meetings like this. You know, like Abigail, I'm having some issues with my internet tonight. And I know in different neighborhoods, you know, broadband is a struggle or non-existent. And that's the way the world runs now. And if every community doesn't have access to that broadband, they can't have access to the same level of education. They can't have access to the same level of public participation. But again, I'm not sure if that fits in this or if that's a different topic, but I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, thank you. You know, we agree, and thank you for that comment. I think it does fit in. Actually, I think that that infrastructure inequities and access to the infrastructure you need to participate, you know, wholly in the way the world is going right now is really critical. And you know, we have heard particularly on the west side that there are areas that where there is very poor internet access, and that's really limiting people's access to opportunity. So you know, it is an equity issue. I don't know if it's an environmental justice pollution issue, but it's certainly an equity issue. And then I agree, like this is not the best forum for getting broad community understanding. So we do want to go out. So again, for everyone, for Matthew Bello and others, if you have groups you want to connect us with that you can help with that, who are working on these issues, please let us know, and we'll do our best to come out. So if you have anything or want to help us, that's great. We are also going to be reaching out through our own contacts. Okay, let's see, Pete.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on Abigail's comment about food and stress it for the west side. And you mentioned it too, Matt, that just off the top of my head, I did a mental walk down the street and counted 9 convenience and or liquor stores on the west side and 3 actual markets, and 2 of them are either a neighborhood or a very small meat market. So this side of town kind of gets outnumbered with our poor food choices. We do have great restaurants though. Also, Matt Bello put a lot in the chat as to industries and manufacturing adjacent to residences, so I won't go to that, and then maybe phase out residences. One thing I noticed on the map is it's listed as Vista Del Mar Hospital. It is actually designated as a real hospital, but it's more of a mental hospital, and I don't think you would go there for medical care. And that's on the west side, so I think that needs to be removed from the map as an actual hospital. And I think that was it. Thanks.
Thanks, Dana.
So just absolutely piggybacking on what Abigail said, reminded me of something, and then Pete brought it up. What surprised me on the map was the corridors where that was related to smoking and related to convenience stores, liquor stores, really struck me. And I realized that I don't know what we do about that, but that feels like health and equity issue, both. So they're fairly concentrated, and that I did not realize they were concentrated quite that way. So that's it.
Thank you. Sorry, I had myself on mute. I've been sick for the last 4 weeks with a cough, so apologies. Okay, so I see no other hands up. I want to ask again, we've heard some from all of you about some issues, other issues, but I just want to make sure that we're really covering everything. Are there issues that we haven't covered? And then, are there areas, we've talked about a couple geographic areas in the city, but are there other geographic areas, maybe smaller pockets, where you feel like there are environmental justice or equity issues in the community that we need to pay attention to? Let's see. Lori, did I see your hand up? Your physical hand?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't use the electronic one. I just wanted to say, definitely Montalvo is an area of the manufacturing zone behind the Johnson corridor. So that's been an issue, and it does need to be addressed. There's abandoned buildings, there's a lot of unused space. Yeah, so I don't know how that gets addressed or how to make a note of that, but definitely that's an area.
Great.
As well as, of course, Satakoy on the other side, but again, that's unincorporated area, but there's parts of Satakoy that are still within the city, but yeah, that's it.
Okay.
And I just had one comment. Ms. Lampara, the organization that Mrs. Lampara mentioned, is it possible for us to follow up with that organization specifically to get the feedback as it relates to this plan driver?
But was that directly to me?
I was actually asking Matt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, we will follow up with Louise to get the organization and make contact.
Thank you. Yeah. That's it.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to go Kelsey.
Just one thing, we were kind of tossing around the fact that the freeway cuts off direct access to the beach last meeting. And for forever, there has been the idea tossed around of the freeway cap there. So just in terms of creating green space and a pedestrian zone that would give access directly to the beach and increase that. And also it's just super dangerous for a vehicle. It's a very weird off ramp, but just a thought.
Yeah, so it's a good idea. We have heard that one. Bill.
So kind of building on what Kelsey just said, it would be interesting too, in terms of, and I think former council member Weir was a big advocate in terms of the coastal erosion, climate change, and how that's overlaying into some of these areas on it. But actually I was just jumping on that previous point, but there's no mention of public safety in this in terms of addressing the needs of the community. It would be interesting to overlay that with, police calls, where are the police responses going for certain activities that would relate more into the social justice area. And same thing with, fire response times, on it. Are there areas that are not being, in these 11 communities, be interesting to overlay the fire response time, even police times, are they getting adequate services from our public safety folks?
So yeah, that's a great point. And yes, I think that is an area we didn't actually talk about a lot in this, which is just overall safety and public safety related to health. Okay, let's see, Philip.
Yeah, so I think maybe this question also goes to the issue of public safety, but I think really what I was looking at was the issue of housing quality. And we noted earlier that, there's a significant percentage of our population that is stressed on rent. And I'm concerned about the renters, and I don't know for sure if there's any data on this, but the issue of not public safety, but the private housing and how well the housing is being taken care of, especially for renters. Are there landlords taking care of their places? I know there's been some issues in the past and in some other areas where you have so-called slumlords who are charging a lot of rent anyway and don't maintain the housing, whether it's lead or just poor plumbing or it's leaking, and then also an issue of public safety in terms of fire hazards and so forth. So I don't know if there's any issues, significant issues with that in this community, but I know it, kind of goes along with lower income communities, also tend to have poorly maintained homes and tenants kind of get exploited. So I'd be interested if we know any data on that.
Yeah, I guess I would actually turn over to members of the public who are here to identify, raise your hand and tell us if you think there are issues related to this. We can look at, we can work with city staff and look at code violation data, which is one of the ways, but we also know that people are afraid to complain about landlords because they don't want to get kicked out because housing is so hard to find, even if it's expensive. So we can look at that. I don't know if anyone wants to raise their hand about this, please go ahead. And then, I'm going to call on Pete next, but really want to encourage all of the members of the public who are here. We want to hear your ideas and thoughts as well. So please raise your hand. We are now in the participatory, everybody raise your hand and chime in portion of the meeting. We actually have been, and I've seen a lot of comments. I haven't been able to read them, but a lot of comments kind of going around the chat here. So please feel free to raise your hand and speak. Use your spoken voice and not your typed voice. Okay, let's see. Pete, go ahead. Yeah, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. This goes to where we might be creating an issue where we talked about the housing element and where to put housing in some of our recent meetings. And we talked about putting them in the commercial area, like south of Main in the Market telephone area. And I'm just wondering if that might create pollution issues for any housing that might go down there. Just something to think about.
Yeah, and I think as we move forward in housing element 2.0, because we're going to be relooking at that with the rest of the general plan, we can overlay those housing element parcels with some of these the disadvantaged communities and some of the pollution to identify where they're going relative to the issues that we've identified. Nicholas.
Thanks, Matt. And I certainly don't mean to, exclude other people from talking, but so feel free to not call on me if others are raising their hand.
I agree. I want more people to raise their hands. So,
yeah.
But go ahead in the interim.
It's just, as the dialogue goes on and people are commenting, just lots of things coming to mind, comments that Louise made and also that Kelsey made about access. It occurred to me that, the systemic, and I think part of this process is just enlightened dialogue that everybody is sharing and learning and growing, and that's valuable. The internet, the fact that we can all sit at home in our comfy chairs and have this conversation is pretty amazing. So, some good things came from this pandemic, I guess. It occurs to me that, we've been systemically throughout the nation, systemically zoning people into economic isolation, and then getting furious that they would have the nerve to form gangs and band together to try to take care of each other. It's really interesting how deep and interwoven these issues are. And we talk about, community safety. The more we can integrate and create, places where people feel like they're part of the community, the less likely they will be to isolate and participate in anti-community activity. So I think this is a hugely important dialogue from that perspective. It occurred to me that I'm not quite sure where access fits into this conversation, but we talked about bicycles and pedestrians and all that. That's great. I don't know how many of you remember, but probably it's been 15 years, maybe longer. There was a pedestrian bridge proposed over the 126 freeway to connect one neighborhood to another neighborhood and to Camino Real Park and other things. And it was actually funded by Caltrans, and they were ready to build the thing. And some neighbors got riled that gang members would use that bridge and criminals would use that bridge to commit crimes at night. So the whole freaking bridge got axed and cut from the budget. And it was a dialogue of fear, and the city gave into it and chopped the bridge out. I think this is an issue throughout our community. We need to look at ways to tie ourselves together. I often, call it the Great Wall of Ventura, that we allowed somewhere along the line there, somebody decided that building a great big freeway between the town and the beach was a good idea. And so there are 5 points of connection between our city and the coast, underpasses and a horrible overpass at Seaward where we missed an opportunity to build a nice wide bike facilitating sidewalk. The Seaward Avenue, as it curves down to the beach, is a very dangerous place, and cars move very fast. And recently, there was a member of our community advocating for a rail crossing near there to get people from the Midtown, allowed access to the beach. And that's a very hard thing to do because the railroad doesn't want anybody crossing their tracks. So Seaward is really one of our only, we've got Seaward, San Juan. There's some drainage tunnel that runs under near Garden Street. And then, there's a very few places where we can access the beach. And I think the general plan really ought to try to take that on as a part of our excess plan. How do we tie our town back together again?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Trevor, you're next. I've been wondering when your hand was going to go up. You've spoken at every meeting. Go ahead.
Oh, good evening, everybody. Thank you. Nice time to follow. Because, yes, and I see Casey as well smiling. And because it comes down to the root, the source, the origin, where each of us has our own responsibility. And as I said, we have to, all these ideas, we have to implement within ourselves right now. And what Nick is saying with the 5 access points, exactly, because it brought up exactly what happened yesterday morning. I met a man, JM, in Rich Tattoo, and he looked at me and we looked at each other, and there was tension, real tension. And he smiled, but I smiled, and we spoke, and we loved each other's fears away by facing the truth, acknowledging each other, acknowledging our flaws, our failures, and our strengths. and connecting with each other. So this community, this is how we do it. We have to, each of us, be ourselves, be true to who we are, and face it. And the way we do it is we've got to accept each other, love each other, encourage each other, and not police each other. Forgive me for being negative on that, but check on each other, verify with each other, make sure we understand where we may be oblivious, or things that we're oblivious to, and things like that. And the physical aspect, yes, I think a lot of us were confused on the issue with whether the red was the reality or the potential. And the potential is boundless. But yes, it does show a real potential. And we know, but if we have firsthand access and we connect with each other, that's when we find the truth, we face the truth, and we live in the truth. And that's the first place to do it. And we do it with love. It's the only way we all grew up to be ourselves. And those that have been neglected that and are discarded, have longed for it, these are we need to encourage each other in this regard. And then that's what brings peace. Essentially, we do it, and that will bring stability, that sustainability, and we find the natural way to do it, where we all ultimately understand and know and live in that place. And we live in that place a lot of the time, but a lot of the time we disregard all of it. I mean, I know, because this is what I learn within myself. And the way I learn, my parents sent me a pair of animals that are basic, fundamental. They know, they just do what they do. My brother's like that. He just does what needs to be done. He just carries on doing it. No thinking about it, but there's a lot of thinking behind it, because he uses his head and his heart together, like the dogs, like a lot of the animals and all the other growing beings and what have you. But we have the choice. And that choice, of course, we each have to acknowledge each of it. And that's where we find the truth within ourselves. And that's where we connect with each other and we love each other, because we're all brothers and sisters. And us boys, we're brothers in arms, holding and heaving for our sisters and our mothers who care and who should be running the household. And that's pretty much what I have to say for tonight. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Trevor. Matt?
Yeah, I just want to bring up the issue of ADA sidewalks and trees. And I think this does touch on the environment, but I really want to emphasize this. I grew up in the college area and the east side of Ventura. I didn't spend any time on the avenue when I was younger. And when I moved to the avenue, I was really shocked by how many people you actually see in wheelchairs, with errand carts, with baby strollers out in the middle of the road, because most of the sidewalks were developed in the 1920s and 30s, or maybe a couple decades after that. And so you have utility poles stuck right in the middle of these 1920s sidewalks. And you see this maybe in Montalvo as well, but I have never seen it anywhere else in Ventura. And I'm happy to give anyone a tour of it, but it's pretty amazing to see semi trucks going down a road and seeing a disabled person in a wheelchair in the middle of the road as well, because they can't use the sidewalk. It's every day, pretty much every hour occurrence on my street on West Vince. Apart from that, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I know Christy Ware is an amazing member of our community, and she has a huge effort to fill in all the tree wells throughout the city, and I really applaud that effort. The only issue I see is on the avenue. Since we don't have those wider sidewalks, we don't even have the tree wells, and we don't have that canopy when we walk. And I'm an avid walker, and I see every day. I know every block, every corner on the avenue, and there's very, very few streets that actually have tree wells and trees. So I think I put that in some of your surveys and everything, but I do want to make that more public, because I feel like sometimes people in Ventura, they don't go to the avenue that much, and they don't really see like the massive limitations that we have here, that have gone on for ages, for many of the reasons that have been mentioned already. So I'll be quiet again. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Let's see, Doug, and then Nick.
Great, thanks, Matt. Wow, what an invigorating conversation we're having. Everything's so interconnected. As vice chair of this committee, I try to sit back and listen because I'm here to listen and to hear what all the ideas are from our community and from everyone on this committee. I have a lot of my own ideas, but I'd rather hear yours first. And I just want to share some of those ideas, though, with you, because I also want to reach out and to Nick Deitch and just say, having known you for 25 plus years, maybe 30 years, it amazes me how much we agree upon and the issues that we're passionate about. But I see a lot of passion. I see a lot of great ideas. And I'm very happy that we're having this type of conversation. It's a great conversation. But a couple of things I wanted to mention is I love history, and that's what attracted me here to Ventura 36 years ago. I love the fact that this is one of California's old original cities. It's what made California such a great place to live. And I've been a big proponent of covering the freeway for a lot of years, mainly because of the noise, the lack of accessibility to why the city was here to begin with, which was our coastline, and our enjoyment to the beach and reconnecting our downtown and our midtown and west side community back to the coast. As we talk about history, though, there's a reason why that freeway ended up there. I believe it shouldn't have ended up there, but it did. With 150 to 200-year-old history comes, it's a double-edged sword. History is what I think creates the character and the soul of our community. And it's what, like I said, what attracted me here. But we also have the fact that we have history that we're still trying to overcome. Our two main dumps were in the ocean, was at Crown Plaza and at the harbor. The industry that made this community was really the oil industry and the agricultural community. Union Oil was born here, as was Chevron. Those are industries that have had a lot of toxicity associated with the products that they made. I think with a lot of the legislation and a lot of the oversight that we have today, I think we have to make sure that we don't look at all industry as the polluters or the health concerns, because there's a lot of manufacturing that I think is needed in our community. We need those jobs. I also look at, though, housing, and I see that if a city was left to grow naturally, we naturally had housing for the whole bell curve of housing for everybody, from people just starting out to people who have become very successful to the middle income. For 50 to 70 years, we've been focused on the middle income housing over and over and over again. And if you look at places like downtown and midtown and West Side Ventura, you have people that are just starting out maybe in 600 square foot bungalows next to 3,000 and 4,000 square foot homes. And that's how cities naturally were allowed to grow before we started creating all the tract developments and the covenants that restricted certain people from being in different types of community. And a lot of the lower income housing started springing up around areas that a lot of people didn't find attractive or healthy to live next to. And now we got to overcome those negative aspects that no one should have to live next to. We have a lot of brownfields on the west side, land that could be very well used for urban needs in this community that are perceived to be contaminated. And I think we need to look at that and see what is contaminated and how can these parcels become cleaner and part of our urban environment, or maybe parks. I think that too often still today, although the lines are getting blurred, too often economic lines, economic and social lines are run alongside with or in conjunction with racial or ethnic lines. They have gotten blurred in my lifetime to a certain extent, but unfortunately that's still true. And so we have a huge need to get to know each other, for people to understand that the diversity that we have in our community is actually a huge part of our strength of our community, and it's nothing to fear. and to help everybody have the same access, which is the economic justice and social justice that a lot of us have been fighting for years. But I look at, I know I'm talking a lot, but I've been holding back for a while, I look at, I'm very aesthetic in that I love beauty. I love that we live in what probably the most beautiful state in the world. And we live in the oldest city that represents so much of that beauty. And I know the better we take care of our infrastructure, the better we take care of our homes and our properties. When we undergrounded the utilities on Ventura Avenue, it uplifted not just the visual aesthetics of that community, but it uplifted the pride of that community. My work is on Ventura Avenue, and I will say I love that community because it's the most vibrant part of our city. And I would challenge to say it's probably more vibrant than downtown because there's always activity on the streets. And so with that said, the more we can interconnect our communities, the more we could have people of all economic levels, people just starting out and people who have been successful and want to stay in our community and not have to move to other cities around us to enjoy the wealth that they created, but want to stay here and share that with their community, along with the people who are raising families in the middle income level. I think we need to start looking at how we bring those communities back to the way the natural city would have happened and allow those all those people to live together in the same neighborhoods. And it's nothing to fear, it's something to be excited about. I just want to share those few points, and obviously I have more thoughts, but you guys are doing an awesome job, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate the words as always. Nick?
Hi, thanks. I think I want to just mention that I find myself quite on the same wavelength as Doug and Nick Deitch. And of course, I also want to thank Juan. I think the presentation was excellent and enlightening. Going back to something Matthew mentioned of people living in Ventura and not really heading down to the avenue. If that's true of anyone, they're really missing out. I think Ventura Avenue is the heartbeat of Ventura. I think it's one of the strongest things that make the city a unique and vibrant place, as Doug was saying. What I worry about is that, as the avenue is developed, I think I'd like to be part of a crafting policy that would avoid gentrification as it's improved. But as far as, the story I tell sometimes when I first went to Ventura, I was living on the hillside, or I ended up eventually going back to, and didn't get to the avenue that often. And I headed down there to visit a friend, and the first thing I noticed is you could hear music if you went around the neighborhoods, which is something that you really didn't hear on the hillside. And just that whole idea of the whole feeling of vibrance and a real heartbeat of the city. It's something that I think we should maintain and preserve. Another couple of thoughts that I've been having. I really respect the fact that Ventura, at least for the last 100 years, has evolved out of an agricultural and oil community. I think in looking at general plan policy, I think it's time to the degree that we can move away from the oil development aspect and maybe encourage, as far as the agriculture, to encourage more holistic, more organic type of of movement in that direction. So my question, as always, and it's something maybe as we move forward, I'll get better at from, like I can learn a couple of things from Remy and Associates, is how do you craft policy that really is effective in doing that? I think if we said, hey, our policy is we're going to do away with all oil production, that would be something that absolutely couldn't be done. So what can we do as far as crafting a policy that maybe moves us more away from the heavy kind of polluting industrial and more towards a rethinking of industrial that it might be, I might call it craft industrial, woodworkers, musical instrument manufacturers, things that are interesting and could bring a type of industry to Ventura that would be more characteristic of the kind of city we want to create. So all that being said, is I'm kind of throwing out some just some random thoughts here, but I think I would like to see policy crafted that moves us more in a direction that makes us a model city for those kind of things, for cleaner, lighter industrial, for encouraging non-polluting kind of agriculture, and especially embellishing what we've got as far as the avenue, not overlooking it, but really embellishing it and not gentrifying it. And so those are just a couple of random thoughts I've got for this time.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, we're going to do a few more comments and then we are close to wrapping up. So Bill and then Steph.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of jump back to one of the original questions about the general plan pop-ups that occurred. It looks like you, Netta, put in that they did one at Main Street Moves, the Street Painting Festival at the Harbor, the Cruise Night on the West Side, and then at what I believe to be Ventura Coast Brewing Company downtown. So I would just like to see some of those pop-ups occur on the east side. Also, it seems like we haven't had any of those out here on this side of town yet. And then specifically in terms of an event, I walk around Community Park every day, but on Saturdays, it is in full force with the AYSO out there. And it seems like just an incredible opportunity to be out there on a Saturday all day. I mean, I don't know what the hours would be, but there are people there all day long playing soccer with their kids. So it seems like it's a great opportunity to get out there right now and try to get some people that aren't, on this call participating. So that's it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Steph.
This might be a dumb question, but it's getting late and my brain is slowing down. What does it mean to cap a highway? I'm picturing like a roof. Like, what does that mean? And is that the only way to reduce traffic pollution?
So I can try and answer that. So capping a freeway is literally like it sounds. It is putting a roof on the freeway and having that for another use. There are examples of that. It also could be putting freeways underground, which is way more expensive, like the Big Dig in Boston many years ago, price tag way too high. But it is literally capping and putting platforms on part of the freeway and then allowing that to be public open space. Sometimes it's actually private space. Sometimes you can build on top of that. And then it doesn't have to be for all of that, but it really is about tying the community together and providing more open space. So not a dumb question at all. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna go to Leslie.
Hi, I'm just following up a little bit on what Matt said about the trees on Ventura Avenue. And there is a center lane down the avenue that really isn't used for much. I mean, it can be used as a turn lane in some places, but I've often wondered, could that not be a median where there could be some planting and then maybe have a turnout for turns, certain areas that they would need it, but they might be able to put some plants and trees in that center area, and that might help. Also, I know that there was a problem with some of the trees that were planted, that somebody vandalized them. And so I think that's something that needs to be thought through, and how to get people invested in taking care of those trees. So hopefully they won't get vandalized in the future. Anyway,
Thank you.
Thanks for all you're doing. Great.
Thank you, Leslie. Thanks for joining tonight and making a comment. Okay, Nick Deach.
Sorry. Two things. There actually is a conceptual design for the capping of the freeway at California Street. If you can just imagine the California Street Bridge getting about 5 times wider than it is and being lined with buildings on both sides to connect seamlessly the downtown to the beachfront. That was a concept that was very, very thoroughly fleshed out. It's expensive, but the air rights over the freeway are incredibly valuable. There's been a lot of talk about the West Side and walkability in general, and I've seen in the chat about seniors needing access to housing. And interestingly, recently, in the last couple of years, I've heard people who live on the West Side asking, how come we don't have things we can walk to, and where's the walkability for the East Side? The West Side was developed between 1920 and 1930 when cars were not dominant, and so it's inherently walkable. But then we poured all kinds of cars into it, and it's just overstuffed with more cars than it was ever designed to accommodate. If we can tame the car on the West Side, you'll end up with a very wonderful, very walkable community. But right now the car dominates, as it does throughout most of the city. It just wasn't ever intended to dominate the West Side. What I'm really hoping is that we can see along our corridors the establishment of walkable districts, and those are places where affordable housing can happen, senior housing along transit corridors, so that people who have difficulty moving around can easily access transit. We're not going to get good transit until we have a good base of ridership. We got to find that balance between those things. And it's going to take planning. It's just going to take this exact kind of strategic planning in order to make it happen. But I agree with a lot of the speakers. Ultimately, I think this is about what our intention is for the future. And this is about the next 5 or 10 years, but it's also about the next 50 years. And those trees that we're planting are the trees that our kids and our grandkids are going to enjoy. So let's keep planting trees.
Keep planting trees and keep thinking long-term into the future.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Let's see, we are getting close on time here. Before I actually turn it over, I'm going to turn it over to Doug and then Lori to do the final closing comments. Let me just say a couple things really quickly. One is I want to give a big shout out to Juan for the great presentation tonight. We know it was in depth. We know it took a while, but it's just great information there. And so thank you for doing that. And Juan will be coming back to the group and helping out, working on the engagement and environmental justice. So you will see him again. Second is there, as I mentioned previously, there is a visioning survey out. We will send it out to the group. We really want more people to take the survey. So please go ahead and forward that information on. We will send it out to everybody again. Please forward it on. Next is we are going to be going out into the community and doing some more focused engagement work. We have a better sense now with the pop-ups and with the meetings that we've done of who is participating and who is not. So that really helps us to be able to focus a lot more on those efforts. Lastly, we have our next General Plan Advisory Committee meeting next month. We are going to give you the results of the visioning survey. We will give you some high-level takeaways that we had, because it's only a week or two. It's going to close a week or two before our next GPAC meeting. And we're going to dive back into sort of the bigger picture vision that we've had, that we discussed 2 months ago, including trying to address some of these big picture questions of what does small town character mean, and where do we want to grow, and what should the character be? So we're really going to start getting into some more of the kind of more physical planning part moving forward. So that's all I have for you. I'm going to turn it over to Doug first, and then Doug, go ahead and turn it over to Lori.
Okay, great. Thanks, Matt. I actually said a big chunk of what I had to say, but I guess I would like to just kind of end the night on the note that I truly am a firm believer in making sure that we believe that we could do the things that we know can make our community a better place. And if we indoctrinate those things into our documents, into our general plan, then possibilities can occur. And I was talking a little bit in chat about other past possibilities in regards to capping the freeway, which seems like I remember back then, 30 years ago, when we first started talking about it, people were saying how, oh, this is just Ventura. You can't think like that. Well, we're not just Ventura. We're one of the oldest cities in California, one of the most, on the most dynamic coast the world has ever seen. And I believe very strongly that as a native Californian, many of us have seen beautiful, unique places across the strait destroyed and homogenized to look and feel exactly like every other spot. In Ventura, we still have that unique California feel. And I believe very strongly that we can keep what we love about our community and still provide a more vibrant, prosperous community for the next generations to inherit. And I believe the next generation should at least have the chance of being able to be raised or continue spreading their roots in the community that they were raised in. So that's a big part of why I've been so involved over the years in this community. And I know that prosperity and change will occur, and prosperity and creating some housing in certain areas that can handle the housing, that can make our neighborhoods even better. And perhaps with the right designs, where we're not seeing all the same kind of construction, where we look at some of the historic aspects that Ventura was known for the last 150 years, a lot of the buildings that no longer exist here, and maybe encourage new developers, new builders to maybe incorporate some of those elements, not recreate. I don't believe in necessarily recreating, but I believe in sharing unique historic elements that defined Ventura for 100 years that have gone away. Maybe we can encourage some developers to incorporate those in their new construction. So with all that said, I think we have a great opportunity here to really showcase to not just our county, but to the rest of the state and probably to the country, how one of the oldest cities on the West Coast can reinvent itself and enhance what we love about it without losing that, and do that as a community that comes together. So, and this was a great conversation, Tony, very invigorating. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Doug. Lori, I'm going to turn it over to you to close the meeting.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna make it really quick. Thanks to everyone for being here. I just want to reiterate for the east side, the streets and sidewalks are a really big thing among residents on the east side. And so anything that reinforces building, planting more trees, fixing the sidewalks, and keeping our streets paved. And the staff is doing a really good job of catching us up from the backlog of streets repairs. But I just wanted to let everybody know that this council did approve for us to spend more money in those areas. And so there's some things that can be put in the general plan that speak towards making sure that the city plans for things like that ahead of time, including things like investing more in parks and rec, which we're also attempting to do that, but we need to do more of that in the future, so that we can increase the green spaces and the walkability and the bicycle paths and that sort of thing. It all bleeds into one another. I want to also continue on a transparent process with the pop-up meetings that were originally scheduled. I would ask that they be rescheduled, because I know, Matt, we had said we were going to do the pop-up meetings with some of the populations that were difficult to reach. And it's important that we attempt to reschedule that, in addition to the groups that were talked about related to agriculture earlier today. And specifically the environmental justice groups, there's like at least one or two in the area that I'll try to connect them to you. Anyway, thanks to Juan. And it was an extremely detailed presentation. I didn't want to take away from anything. That's why I did not introduce anything or frame anything. I really just wanted the facts and the information to stand alone, and it certainly did. I raised my children in Montalvo, and I was born on the east side in the Bird Track. And there is a Metro Link train down there. That's another issue when you talk about environmental justice. The train would park there every single night, run its engines all night to clean. And a lot of the residents would come to me and say, can we do something about that? Because we're choking on the exhaust from the trains. So that's another thing. And then the last thing I'm just going to say is just one thing about traffic mitigation fees is, so they leave us a specific plan that was that had the development agreement recently approved on council. It was approved because it was a project that had been under works for years. And what's important with environmental justice and housing and the general plan is for us to continue to progress and move forward. And that is just one element of us moving forward. The traffic mitigation fees are the monies that are collected on that project from that project. And so the monies are spent back into that project. So just to give an example, each development project creates its own set of traffic mitigation fees. So when River Park was built, they had to pay the city of Ventura millions of traffic mitigation fees. Almost all of that money was spent downtown, zero on the east side, and mostly on the west side. And so we have to be careful about understanding those dynamics and understanding that all projects, when we spend those monies, it's in the area that the city finds that is appropriate. And but thank you for sitting in through all this long meeting and great input. I appreciate everything everyone had to say, and look forward to the next meeting.
Okay, with that, thank you, everyone. Thanks to my team. Thanks to the interpreters for their work this evening. And we will see you all in a few weeks in mid-October. Thanks for the comments, and we'll be back in touch soon. Have a good night, everybody.